Good morning, Corky, or afternoon. I want to try to talk a minute about the difference between classic and contemporary music making and talk about the sensory issues, which I think are very important. It's kind of a generation gap thing, a reality that we deal with, especially those of us who are aged. We struggle with, technology and recent developments. So I want to talk about the meaning of a lot of these experiences that we've had, especially for those who make music. And I have transitioned in my life through several different formats. As far as music listening, I have moved from 45 RPM, 33 and a third RPM, to 8-track tape after reel-to-reel tape, and then 8-track to cassette to digital audio tape, and then move from there to digital music, CDs, now to streaming online. That's a tremendous amount of change in a lifetime for the media that you work with as a music maker. So my talk here is not going to be just about recording, because the social aspect of music is extremely important, and I'm going to integrate that into my thoughts here. And I'm posting these videos for people I think can help them right now, and then also I'm more or less logging this in as legacy, so for the future after I'm gone, my children will be able to consider the thoughts that were a result of my long time experience. So, and I think my buddies that are my age, late 60s, early 70s, I think they will really appreciate what I'm saying here, because it's something that we deal with. What gives me the right to give this talk? Well, I have been a studio musician on at least 13 albums. I have been a live musician as a bassist, guitarist, sometimes drummer, oftentimes keyboard player, mandolin player, in acoustic music. So my experience has been, over the last 53 years, has been acoustic music, electric music, and in more recent times, digital music to a degree. And so this is not just going to be a rant by an old man. Hopefully I'll offer some ideas. That generation gap from my generation, talking about my generation, you know what I'm saying, to like my son-in-law, Matthew, who is a music producer now, and he's totally into the current contemporary aspect of music making. I am from another time, and I have just dabbled in digital music, okay? I'm not going to get into all the controversy about analog versus digital, although I think that's probably the difference that I'm describing. When analog music comes on, my ears know it very well. And when digital music comes on, I can tell the difference between that too. Let's go back to 1964 when the Beatles came to America, which is celebrated this week as, I think, maybe they're saying 58 years ago at this point. The Beatles played um, Ed Sullivan Show, New York, Miami. And then they played Washington, D.C. And in their experience, at this time, the guitars were all in tube amps, in their case, Vox amps. The drums were not mic'd, particularly for the drums, and the vocals were all through a public address system, which had no monitors on the floor. So they, as well as us, who began making music in the 60s, learned to play music with more of the band volume on us, and the vocals were further away, and sometimes almost unable to hear them. The Beatles were also plagued with something that we were never plagued with, and that was screaming girls. And all the screaming, the Beatles, they said they couldn't hear themselves play or sing. So in order to play and sing on tempo without being able to hear yourself or hear the band means that you're playing pretty much by feel, or you're watching the drummer's snare hand. And there's got to be some other dimension other than just the audio that you're going by. And that's a very, very true fact, and it's something that needs to be talked about. And that is that our generation, or my generation, we learned to play by feel. So we played by not just the sound of in our ears of the frequencies and the tones and things that we were hearing with our ears, but we also felt vibrations from the music in our body. Our amps coming in our back or facing the drums. If you were a guitar player, you stood in front of the drum set and the drums. And this is why most of us of this generation are suffering from tendonitis in the ear. My 5K is gone. I can imagine Eric Clapton's is totally gone. He says it is. And that was due to those 100-watt Marshalls. They were filling up arenas with guitar amps that were coming across their shoulder to fill the room up. So it's quite different experience playing in a 60s, 70s live band than it would be today, with all the direct lines going in and the mix being in the headphones or the earpieces, digitally, the guitars wired in directly to the sound system, so forth, bass even into the main sound system, and everything that's making the real noise is out front and you're in the back, so that professional bands that perform today, you might go out in front of the PA in the audience and it'd be extremely loud, but when you get on the stage and you hear what they're hearing, very little noise. So it's a totally different experience because they're behind everything and they have monitors that they can keep at a reasonable level. What you'll find on that is that most of the 60s and 70s players are going to want to feel more of the music. They're not going to want, baffles in front of the drums and stuff to prevent the bleeding over the mics, because that prevents the drum vibrations from getting to the band members, and that feel is part of the way we kept on tempo and played. So that's the sensory experience. So that now, sometimes I'm asked to play guitar in church or with a group where they are totally digital and they're going in and they ask me to put earplugs in or headphones on to play. Not a good experience for me. Recording in the studio was the first experience like that we had. and it's not ideal for a live musician. Um, I'm going to talk on another video about the difference between a musician and a performer. And I was just listening to the Fifth Dimension uh, and hearing them do songs by the Association. These are the 60s groups. Um, Fifth Dimension were definitely performers. The Association, along with the Wrecking Crew, of course, doing their tracks, were musicians. So they would move around to different instruments in the studio, stuff like that. Live recording, with the stories that we've heard, the Allman Brothers at Fillmore East in 1971 being one of the most significant live recordings in history of a band. This was a real issue for Tom Dowd, the producer, who had also produced Cream and Aretha Franklin and some other people. And so there was, because the bands were playing live and playing at a volume level to achieve the feel, there would be tremendous bleed overs on the mics, so that the producer or the engineer, Tom Dowd, couldn't keep the guitar and the vocal and the drums and all in separate channels and couldn't manipulate them because they're bleeding over on each other. And this especially happened the night at Fillmore East that they brought in horn section for Greg's request. And that's not been released yet, not even since 71, because there was so much bleeding over the mics. And producer Tom Dowd got angry about that, I understand. So live recording is an issue, but you have to remember that most of the 60s and 70s players had been playing, primarily mono and then stereo came in. So we were looking to blend instruments. That was the idea, to blend everything together into a sound. Bass drum with the bass guitar, blend them together, make one strike, and they're both together. And then the rhythm guitar blending with the rhythm section to form a groove. Okay, and then digital comes along, stereo comes along, and they start separating everything. And that, what Neil Young said was that you're taking apart what we put together. And that's really a fact, so much so that the Beatle engineers do not recommend listening to Beatle albums in stereo because everything was being compressed into mono. A click track is standard use today. My son-in-law Matt, he uses that. That click track will be in the headphones of the band. Ringo Starr got really angry about that and said he was a click track, and he really was. And so this is something that we struggle with, older people moving into this contemporary time of music making. But the click track has a purpose, and it is important for the mix, being able to mix the music together in the final analysis. I'm not sure how much the click track benefits the player when they are in the band. Obviously, if you're not going to get to hear the drums, you're going to need to hear a click track probably. Now, here's the deal. We started learning to play in small venues, like a living room, a garage, maybe an amphitheater, maybe a church building, small venues, not 1,000 people, maybe 100, maybe 200, maybe 40, maybe 20, maybe 5. And this is really the reality of what I call social music. That is, music made in a small area that includes the audience or includes the people. So if you're going to play in small venues, and really, if you're a Christian musician, the majority of churches are small. all those little churches you pass on your way to the big church are, 30 to 40 people. And so uh, it's not going to be necessary to do a huge digital operation with, lots of bells and whistles. If you can strum a guitar in a room, and that is, you get used to the sound of the guitar and the vibration of the guitar in your lap and in the room with the people. And then nobody's singing on a microphone, everybody's just singing around like a sing along. Uh, there's air in that room. Now, if you've got on headphones, for me, my experience of putting on headphones is it takes the air out. Now, I know that when I'm playing, that sound of that instrument goes out in the room, and there is air in the room before it gets to the microphone. That's why it changes when you record in different spaces. But you know, to close my ears up with headphones, uh, I believe that it's true that we actually not only breathe with our mouth and nose, but we also breathe through our ears. So it has to do with oxygen to me, and the air in the room, a small venue. So if the majority of you that are going to be making music are never going to be making music in the presence of large crowds, then you need to learn how to play the old fashioned way, if you pardon the expression, or the way that we learned in the 60s, and that is learning to play in a room, learn how to adjust levels of instruments in a room and be able to hear the vocals. Or maybe if you're doing rock or rock flavored things, then you're not going to need to hear a lot of vocal. Uh, During the punk bands and much of rock and roll, we heard very little vocals. I mean, if you went to a rock concert, you didn't expect to be able to hear every word. And that was the criticism of the 50s generation of parents. We can't understand the words. And we knew that because we were not trying to do that. That's something you do for an album or a recording, and that becomes like the manuscript of the song. And then the live performance of it is the delivery. And that's a very much of a experiential thing. Um, this is part of what the Grateful Dead wanted us to know about. Not that they were playing great manuscript songs, but that they were having an experience live. And that is also the difference between, say, evangelical churches and Pentecostal churches. Is the evangelical churches are trying to get like a manuscript up in the air and get to that and get something very scripted and perfect, whereas the Pentecostal churches expect for there to be sounds, a lot of sounds and rhythm and movement and uh, emotive expressions. That's what we expect. So you go to a Pentecostal church, if you're going to sit there like you're at a seminar, you're going to be disappointed because it's going to be a lot of sounds that are going to ride over because and we make no apology for that. It's an emotional experience. It really is. And people have hard lives. They live hard lives all week. And when they get to church, they should feel their religion, I believe. And even you young folks aren't going to like that word religion, but it was a good word for us. But so anyway, there's some thoughts on the difference between classic and contemporary music making, the sensory issues, and the argument that I'm making here is that if the majority of your venues that you're going to make music in are small, then you need to learn to work without all the technology. You need to be working, with the acoustic instruments, acoustic piano rather than electric piano, and you need to be, working with, you know, present instruments that are present in the room. And that is a wonderful way to make music, and it's a good way to learn attack on your instrument because you're getting the vibrations and all. And so those are just some thoughts. Y'all have a good one.